Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by OnlineGreatBooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas.
Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to the Online Great Books podcast. I'm Brett, the producer. This is our final show of 2022. Scott and Karl will begin to explore the 3,000 pages of Shelby Foote's Civil War, a narrative, a 3-volume set totaling over 1.2 million words. They're going to leave 1 million of those words untouched in this conversation, but I have the feeling they will be back for more Shelby Foote-inspired conversation at some point in the future. Thank you for being patient with us in this more occasional recording schedule, but it was important to get one more show to you in the year 2022. Thank you, as always, for listening. Thank you for your support. And thank you for taking a moment to write a review, as you're about to hear Scott and Karl discuss in the intro to this show. There's a lot ahead, so we're going to get right to it. And here we go.
I'm Scott Hambrick.
I'm Karl Foote.
And this is our second attempt at recording this podcast.
So we're having a little bit of technical difficulty. So if the sound is not up to the ordinary sterling standards of Brett Van Nott, it's our fault.
Yeah,
actually, it's Scott's fault.
It's my fault. I remember messing with the Apple IIe, the VIC 20, and I remember, and then later on the 2GS, I think it was called, and then later on my Pentium 286, 16 megahertz processor PC, and thinking, one day these things are going to be like a Toyota. Like you'll turn it on and it'll just work. Wrong.
Well, if they all just worked, it would put tech support and all those long-term contracts out of business.
But you can't record a audio stream after a driver update, but we'll be able to go to Mars. Like all the drivers and everything that runs the support module, that shit, there's no way that's going to get the blue screen. It'll be fine. Right?
Yeah. Right. No, I was never, okay, put it this way. Dealing with computers a lot will make you skeptical of the moon landing.
Of course. Hey, Karl, would you like me to read this review to you again?
Sure.
All right. This is on Apple Podcasts, a review from one Merrimack Kid. If I had his home address and phone number, I would give it out. 1-star review.
Oh, thank you, Merrimack, for that 1 star.
2 guys who think they're smart, but really are stupid. I was really looking forward to several of these podcasts, but as most stupid people, they insist they are experts on all things, including politics. Of course, they're supposed to be reviewing books, but the reviews are more about them than THEN, the book. And it does not matter if the book is a history book, if a historical period, or a novel about the past or future. Huh? They always turn it into something they want to be critical of our world today. Huh? And of course, it is always a criticism of our country. Well, I don't live in another country. What am I like? Okay. But not things that are really critical. It's just critical of thinking and smart people. They claim to be educated. If that is true, they must have been educated by an idiot who wants more idiots in our country. In summary, they and their podcast is trash. Hey, Merrimack Kid, you are the idiot in the room. This is not a book review podcast. I say
no, it never has been.
Never has been. This show is whatever it ends up being after Karl and I turn the microphone on. Sometimes we'll hove closely to the text, and sometimes we'll talk about fencing. Next, I have never claimed that I'm an expert on anything. I tell people I'm a barely reformed redneck, and it's all I can do to get through this stuff. I have never claimed to be an expert once. You want us to be something that we're not. You tuned into the wrong podcast. Go listen to the Hillsdale College one and get all those normicon takes and just soak all that up and just get all yummy with it, because this is not the show for you. You missed the whole plot. What would you like to say about that, Karl?
I probably am dumb and was probably educated by dumb people who wanted there to be more dumb people in the world.
Yeah, that's probably true.
That's probably true.
Me too. I get it. Fine.
But, part of the point of online great books, which is what this show is connected to, about it's freeing you from the expert that, in fact, maybe not you, Merrimack, but most people can read these books and they can get something out of them. And what's really interesting is not necessarily the book, but the process of digesting the book.
Yep. How many times have I said that it can't be the book? Like in the great books process, it can't be the book. We read Karl Marx, we read Adam Smith. Is it the book? It can't be. We read Aristotle's Politics, we read Leviathan. Right? We read the Republic, we read Aristotle's Politics. It can't be the book. The books don't fit.
The point isn't to get a bunch of bullet points about Aristotle or Thomas Hobbes or Karl Marx or Adam Smith and then be able to regurgitate them. That is not smartness. That is not intelligence. That's dumbness. That is being a talking parrot. Okay? Intelligence seems to me it would be, well, as Aquinas says, intelligence is being able to see the middle term. I think he's stealing that from Aristotle. In other words, that you quickly can see connections between things that maybe other people don't see.
Right.
And reading the books is not to memorize the connections that Adam Smith has made. It's to get better at doing it yourself so that you can judge, well, was he right about free trade? That's the whole point. And Scott and I talking books here, we're going to talk about volume 2 of Shelby Foote's book about the Civil War. I mean, if you want a book review, they exist, but this book has been tearing me up and wringing me out. So we'll probably talk about that, and maybe not so much about on this day Jefferson Davis went to Mississippi. On this day, that's grade school stuff.
Yeah, that's 6th grade book report stuff, Merrimack kid. These people, I told you last time we recorded. I'm tired of talking to the public. I know that he's the tip of an iceberg where, he's loud and he's stupid. I mean, he says I'm stupid. No, this guy missed the entire point. And for every one of him, there's 100 that aren't that way and enjoy the show and whatever. But I don't ever hear from them, All you people that enjoy it and get a chuckle out of it and think of something new, you turn it off and go listen to another fucking show. And then this idiot, leaves a review, or I get the hateful fucking email from somebody who's like, oh, Matt Reynolds is the expert, Scott's not. Why do I have to hear you on the Barbell Logic podcast? Karl's got a PhD. What do I have to hear from you? So, thanks for all you people that love it and don't do anything. Thanks a lot.
I mentioned the show on my very small Instagram since my previous one got banned for acorn advocacy. Some people say, mentioning my favorite podcast ever. When are you going to record again? So they're out there.
They're out there. They are.
But dear listener, you could send a note or two. It would make our day.
And if you see Merrimack Kid, blackjack him. I never advocate violence, Karl. It's all comedy.
That's right. Use your own judgment out there.
So, have you noticed on the Twitter, Karl, that the Tropical Club Excellent crew has kind of gotten on the Shelby Foote train in the last, maybe like the last week or so? Have you seen this?
Oh, I haven't.
Yes. The Club Tropical Excellent crew has really jumped in on this. In my opinion, Shelby Foote made Ken Burns' career. Ken Burns is a talented documentarian. He innovated some, the sort of panning into these still photographs to create a sense of motion and make it more cinematic. Mm-hmm. And he did some stuff, and I have respect for what Ken Burns did. But Shelby Foote made him. What would the Civil War documentary have been without Shelby Foote? Shelby Foote talking about things that happened 120 years ago like it was this morning. Foote is widely criticized by quote-unquote experts, the people that Merrimack Kid want to listen to, as a pop historian. He is not a serious historian, according to the people who want to control us, frankly. I was interested in Foote, as always, and I dug in on Wikipedia, actually. And then I went to Infogalactic because I like to see the differences in the two. On Wikipedia, they criticize him heavily for this is so interesting to me. I'm going to have to turn off the transporter extension in my Brave app. Otherwise, I cannot get to Wikipedia. But anyway, they said that he is a perpetuator of pseudo-history, Karl. Did you know that? Did you know that?
Well, now I do.
Yes, he is a perpetuator of pseudo-history. So I'm like, what is this? This pseudo-history. What is this? So I go to Wikipedia again. Pseudo-history. Let's do it right now. Pseudo-scholarship that attempts to distort or misrepresent the historical record, often by employing methods resembling those used in scholarly historical research. Do I need to read that again?
Sure. Yeah.
Pseudo-history is a form of pseudo-scholarship. Okay. That doesn't really mean anything. That attempts to distort or misrepresent the historical record, often by employing methods resembling those used in scholarly historical research. The related term cryptohistory is applied to pseudo-history, derived from the superstitions intrinsic to occultism. It is also related to pseudoscience and pseudo-archaeology.
Okay, so the story that he's telling is false.
That's not what they said, is it?
It's distorted.
It's an attempt to distort or misrepresent the historical record. Now, this is interesting because historical record on Wikipedia is a hyperlink. Let's click that. Recorded history. It takes us to recorded history. It describes the historical events that have been recorded in a written form or other documented communication, which are subsequently evaluated by historians using the historical method. Hyperlink. The historical method is the collection of techniques and guidelines the historians use. So, QED. Let me save you some time. History is what historians do. Historians have jobs at colleges. Now, one of the biggest things that I have learned from reading the great books is that history is a very, very weird, tenuous thing. You know, I read Thucydides, and they got the funeral oration there right at the very beginning of the book, you know. And it's like, quote, and then there's 6 pages, end quote.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, that cannot possibly be. That's become history.
Well, history means research. It's whatever Herodotus did. That's what I always say when we read Herodotus. Is it true? What does that even mean for a historical event?
Yeah, Herodotus, that's another one. You know, he describes alligators, or actually crocodiles and giraffes and these things. He's never even seen them.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy talk.
Well, there's an idea that there is, so I'm just flipping through this Wikipedia page. If the sources all agree about an event, historians can consider the event proven. When has that ever happened, ever?
Yeah, what are the criteria for doing that? How does that work?
I just would like to know when there's ever an event that all the sources agreed on.
Right.
When has this ever happened? What is the one historical fact that we could be sure of?
Oh, my God. And then there's more. Again, he is attacked then for also carrying on the lost cause mythology.
Yeah, I don't think that's right.
I don't think that's true either. He's really not a lost cause.
He's like a Roosevelt progressive, isn't he?
Yeah, I think so. So I was reading about this and people's reception of his work, and I was seeing people that were saying that he was an apologist and that he is one of these folks who doesn't believe that the Civil War was really about slavery and that it was about civil rights and dominion over these other. And I am so tired of this. I am so tired of these people that say that it was strictly about slavery. Even if it's about slavery, it's still about states' rights. It all boils down to, does the state have the right to do this or that thing that you don't agree with? So you retards that took American history through 1865 at your stupid school, and the guy told you that it was about slavery. Even if it's about slavery, it's irreducibly about states' rights. How could it fucking not be? So if in this conflict, even if its trigger condition was about slavery, if the pro anti-slavery group, if the abolitionist group prevails, then your future ability to do anything in your state that the federal government disagrees with is gone. It's merely a test case. And look, and again, don't be as dumb as Merrimack Kid. This is not an apology for slavery. Right? It could have been about abortion. Right? It could have been about marijuana use. It could have been about anything. But the question of, does the state have the right to do this controversial thing, is what's at test. Anyway, so there.
Maybe it was Davis who said this somewhere in the book. Yeah, so I think it's page 13.
Good old Karl bringing us to the book.
Yeah, because I take notes.
Good old Karl.
I was among those who from the beginning predicted war, not because our right to secede and form a government of our own was not indisputable and clearly defined in the spirit of that declaration, which rests the right to govern on the consent of the governed, but because I saw that the wickedness of the North would precipitate a war upon us. Well, that's like a quadruple negative. Thank you, Jefferson Davis. But what's the declaration say? That governments, what is the word? Derive their power from the consent of the governed.
Right.
Okay, so that was the deal. Now, the Declaration of Independence is not a governing document. It's the document that makes the new nation. And then the Constitution, first the Articles of Confederation, and then the Constitution are the governing documents. But the conditions upon which all of the states joined was consent of the governed. Okay? And Merrimack, I would refer you to our discussion of the abolitionist Lysander Spooner's work on this matter. You might find interesting. And so if they found, for whatever reason, if a state finds the government repugnant to it, does it not have a right to withdraw consent? Well, apparently not. Okay. And you'll get invaded. Now, it's over slavery. Yeah, it's about the extension of slavery in the new territories and making new states that are going to bolster a northern mercantilist. It's a power play. I don't know.
It could have been about anything, though.
It could have been. It's about slavery, and that makes it impossible for people to think about this in any depth. But try out there, okay, and think about it.
Over sending arms to the Ukraine. It could have been over tariff and trade policies. It could have been over anything, but it did have to be about something that people felt strongly about on the Federalist side.
Yeah, so it's the Civil War. Is it about slavery? Well, yes, of course, but that's part of the iceberg. Maybe it's even a big chunk of the iceberg.
Of course.
But the fact is that after 1865, it is a completely different country.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote there on page 13 at the bottom, that paragraph there from Davis is the summary of the Southern view of the war. And so if the historical record is about contemporary written sources, what better contemporary written source about the political view of the Confederate States of America would there possibly be than a public statement from the president of that nation?
Yeah, I don't know what else you can do. The problem with history is, I think that's about as good as you can do. And I've told this story before. When I went to summer school back in 1986, 85, it wasn't because I flunked. It was because I was in the band. We didn't have time for everything. So I had to go take history at the public school. Me and my brother and our friend, and we set the curve for all the public school kids who were there because they'd flunked.
Right.
And we ruined their summer. Tough luck. But it was taught by two people, and they were very good. I remember they said at one point, and they suckered me in, and they said, what's more important, what actually happened or what people believe happened? And I, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, said, well, what actually happened? No.
Right.
Well, for one, you can't really know what actually happened.
Right.
And for two, people act based on what they believe happened.
This is true. This is true. So, whatever the real conflict was about, and by the way, it was about more than one thing, like you said. And we'll come back to that. Whatever we believe it was about now is actually more important. So when I'm yelling, am I shouting in the void, or am I working towards like changing the perception of what happened for it, so that a future understanding of that history is different? I don't know the answer. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have had conflicts with my wife that, there are two parties. There's me and her, and we're in a conflict. And sometimes I'm in the conflict for a reason, and she is in the conflict for a separate reason. They're both true. They're both real. And then we kiss and make up, and then time goes by, and the recollection of it becomes much different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, what does that mean? What does that mean for history? I don't know. I think they're.
Okay, so Hegel has this essay somewhere on the philosophy of history of philosophy. I can't remember.
All is lost.
And he says something like, I could, I think it applies here. I could tell you about the positions of dead philosophers, he says in this essay, but that would be as useful as dragging their dead corpses through the classroom. Rather, the goal is to get you to understand and think what they thought. Not think the facts as they thought, but get into their spirit and think. Like, if you're going to do Heraclitus, you don't just say, well, actually, he's right about flux or something like that. No, you have to get into the fire, and seeing fire and everything. You have to kind of become a Heraclitean for a little bit and get it.
Can I help?
Otherwise, it's just.
Can I help you get into Jefferson Davis for just a minute? Get into the fire?
Well, that's kind of the point, right? What are these people doing? Why would they do this? What did they think was at stake?
Let no man hug the delusion that there can be renewed associations between them, meaning the North and the South. Our enemies are a traditionalist and homeless race. From the time of Cromwell to the present moment, they have been disturbers of the peace of the world. Gathered together by Cromwell from the bogs and fens of north of Ireland and England, they commenced by disturbing the peace of their own country. They disturbed Holland, to which they fled, and they disturbed England on their return. They persecuted Catholics in England, and they hung Quakers and witches in America. And they have continued to meddle in politics to this very day.
So I thought that was a brilliant little piece of political rhetoric, blaming everything on the Puritans. All you Scotch Irish, it's all your fault.
Like, who's John Brown? Who are the fire-breathing abolitionists that are pressuring the federal government to take these actions? When he writes, when Foote writes about the balancing act that Lincoln is in between the Jacobins and the more moderates that he's having to deal with, who are the people pushing for a more drastic reaction to the South?
Well, there's that element. There's also, you could say, the Civil War was about mercantilism, like colonizing Texas for cotton growth.
We repeat ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, no, listen, I mean, he says that, right? They disturbed their own country. They fled. They went to Holland. They threw monkey wrenches there. They got ran back out of there. They went back during the interregnum in England, persecuted Catholics there. They got ran out of there. I mean, this is what they do. And our foreign policy is a direct descendant. There's a straight line between this complaint that Davis has and the foreign policy that we have today. Merrimack Kid.
He's not going to listen to this.
I don't care.
Well, so the story begins, volume 2, the 1,000 or so pages of volume 2 begins with Jefferson Davis's journey to the West to try to raise the spirits. In Virginia, Foote says in Virginia, where if anywhere the war was being won. So they're doing okay in Virginia, and they're not doing so okay everywhere else, the Confederates. Mm-hmm. And so Davis needs to go get recruits. And so he does kind of a barnstorming thing. I think he rides a train. This is before the rail lines get cut, giving speeches to try to rally everyone to the cause.
Yeah, you might call it a whistle-stop tour.
The thing that really bugs me about this is this was an invasion to compel behavior. And yeah, you might think it's worth it. It didn't start because of slavery. After the Emancipation Proclamation, you might make the case that it's more about slavery, but it didn't start because of slavery. That's absolutely true. It started because of secession.
Yep.
And yeah, they seceded because of slavery, sure. But this is not a transitive property, right?
If you are a pro-choice person and the Supreme Court says you can't perform abortions legally, it's because of this that matters to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it cuts both ways, you dummies.
Well, we could take that analogy further. Let's say the state of, obviously this is not the current status, but let's say the state of New York or the state of California wishes to have abortions up to and including the first year after birth, which they probably will. Should the non-pro-choice states invade the pro-choice states because of the great injustice being done, in their opinion, to the lives of those children? If you say no, you have to think about that.
Okay. So here's a question. Is this a dead issue? Did this settle it?
What, federalism? The right of secession?
Well, I was thinking the other side of that coin, which is the state of somethingvania or something stan legalizes post-birth abortions.
Mm-hmm.
And the Supreme Court says that's a no-go. Well, the Civil War settled this, right? If you go by precedent, then the chief executive and the commander-in-chief has to roll out the military and stop it. The attorney general writes them a letter, they issue an injunction, then they don't follow the rules of the court order or the injunction. Drone strikes have to happen.
Right. That's because of the events of 1861 to 1865.
Right.
That it is clear that this is the policy of the federal government, that if you oppose them, you will be killed. I mean, states' rights are dead, ultimately.
But is this a settled issue?
Everybody seems to say, yeah, let's have civil war. No, please, let's not.
Oh,
but
yeah, right.
Yeah, but we have precedent. We have Abraham Lincoln, in the defense of Union. He went to war for the sake of the Union.
The Union. Union.
Yeah, and established that this will be enforced. So you Texans can talk all they want about secession. It's not going to happen. You'll get invaded, at least if past history is any guide.
Yeah, so is it a dead letter? Or not a dead letter, a dead issue? The state's subordination to the feds.
I think it's a dead issue.
It probably is.
It wasn't a civil war. It's a revolution. The country is entirely different. Slavery was ended, which is good, at the cost of very, very many dead and a complete change in the nation. Many things can happen at once. A thing isn't necessarily always good or bad. Sometimes a thing can be good, bad, which, the Civil War, I think, clearly was. Anyway, the writing,
he's such a good writer.
The writing is very good. It's a pleasure to read, except that if you have any empathy at all, it will rake you over the coals, this book. Because for me, the thing about the Civil War, me living somewhere in the middle of the country, I know all of these people. Me living somewhere in the middle of the country and having at least half of my family being closer to redneck than urban sophisticate. They talk like people I know. You read this book because it's compiled and he's using actual people's words. This isn't me reading about Xenophon stuck in the middle of Persia, where it's a bunch of hoplites. I have not so much in common with the hoplites, although more than you'd expect. These are, well, I was telling you, I was reading that book. I'm listening to it in the car, reading Anabasis in the car. It seems like it would be such a relief to be cut off behind enemy lines in Persia and have to fight my way out. Life would be clear and simple.
That's what Jeb Stewart said.
I don't remember that.
Well, he didn't say that, but I mean, he clearly was never more alive than he was, than he was when he was behind lines, doing what he.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Like last week, I went and cut firewood with the uncles, and they're going to go again Thursday. And I love to cut firewood. I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do. And why? Well, you're running this chainsaw. When I'm running a chainsaw, I'm like, where are my feet? Where's my leg? What is this limb going to do? What is this tree going to do? It just commands my entire attention. You can't think about inflation or your nose itching, nothing. Like everything is focused so that you don't bleed out in a pasture somewhere or something. And I just love that about it.
Yeah.
Nathan Bedford.
If I weren't talking to you, I'd be doing it today. So anyway, the thing is, you know these people, and the way they talk is so entertaining. It's just like, tell General Lee if he wants a bridge of dead Yankees, I can furnish him with one. What's that one Pelham says to the Yankees? This is at Fredericksburg. In admiration for the Union soldiers. Okay, so Fredericksburg is a complete disaster for the North. Ambrose Burnside of the famous Sideburn. Just, dear listener, look up a picture of Ambrose Burnside and you'll know why they're called Sideburns. He completely botches trying to take Fredericksburg. I think Longstreet's on the ridge. They have the South has defensive positions well dug, and they have a killing zone. And like the sunken causeway or something, the sunken
road. Yeah.
And Burnside just keeps sending these brave federal troops up this road. And just over and over again. And, gosh, if you're just a reader of history,
well, this is pseudo-history, Karl.
Well, yeah. But here I am as an observer 150 years after the fact, 160, however many years it is, being amazed at the valor, gallantry, bravery of everybody in the battle and the stupidity of Burnside. But it's not the soldiers' fault that their general was not very smart. It's like reading the Iliad, you know? You read the Iliad and Hector and Achilles are both in many ways admirable. And you don't just sit there, maybe you're sympathetic to one or the other, but it doesn't take away from the glory of the other.
Right.
And I love Pelham's quote. So Pelham is a young artillery captain. He showed up as a character in that Walker Percy thing we did. He's the one that shows up at the Donahue show and says, I don't think much of it. Pelham is shouting to the Yankees. He says, well, you men stand killing better than any I ever saw.
A little backhanded.
Which is a well-turned phrase, but it's true, you know? The North is going to spend so many troops on this thing. How do you get them to do it? What sort of men do this kind of thing? Go on, Bluebelly. Bring them boots and blankets. Bring them here. I can't say that word right. How do you say Hyar?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't do that. Foote says somewhere that the Federal was esteemed for his pelt.
Right. Yeah.
These little turns of phrase are fantastic. Well, he's esteemed for his pelt because the Federals have wool coats and the Confederates have nothing.
Yeah, wasn't.
And so if you manage to...
They called him commissary? Because
no, it was Commissary Banks.
Banks, yeah. They were just stealing everything from him, you know. It's great. I want to read about Burnside. This is on page 24. There are great lessons to be learned in this book. I want to read about Burnside. Burnside, too, was weighing these possibilities. Doesn't matter what they are. And it seemed to him also that the situation was heavy with the potentials of disaster, much more so, in fact, than it had been before he shifted his army eastward in November from the scene of Pope's late August rout. Though so far he had escaped direct connection with the military fiasco, he had not been unacquainted with sudden blows of adversity in the years before the war. This is where it gets interesting. Once, as a newly commissioned lieutenant on his way to the Mexican War, he had lost his stake to a gambler on a Mississippi steamboat, and again in the mid-50s, he had failed to get a government contract for the manufacture of a breech-loading rifle he had invented and put his cash in after leaving the Army to devote full time to its promotion, which left him so broke that he had to sell his sword and uniforms for money to live on until his friend McClellan gave him a job with the land office of a railroad where he had prospered. Between these two financial upsets, he had received his worst personal shock when a Kentucky girl, whom he had wooed and finally persuaded to accompany him to the altar, responded to the minister's final ceremonial question with an abrupt, emphatic no. Hard as they had been to take, these three, among several lesser setbacks, had really hurt no one but himself, nor had they seriously affected the 38-year-old general's basically sunny disposition. But now that he had the lives of 200,000 men dependent on his abilities, not to mention the possible outcome of a war in which his country claimed to be fighting for survival, he did not face the likelihood of failure with such equanimity as he had shown in those previous trying situations. And this is something that's always been very interesting to me. I've had this conversation with my sister dozens of times over the last 50 years. It goes a little something like this. You know, old so-and-so is really smart, but keeps doing stupid things.
Keeps doing stupid things.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, how many stupid things can you do before you're stupid? Before we, you know, like maybe your IQ, maybe you can recognize the middle term, right? But when it comes time to act, you have poor judgment. You know, how do we figure that out? If you're in a position to choose subordinate leaders, you know, how much of Burnside's personal failure do you take into account? You know, I think the warning signs for the disaster at Fredericksburg are already in Burnside. And I've got the benefit of you know, hindsight and so on, armchair general or whatever. I mean, you know, I understand that. But this is a guy who had repeatedly made bad decisions. Now, somebody's going to say, well, you know, Grant really never was a success in the business life and so on either. But his failures are relegated to that arena. right? Burnside fucks up everything he touches, from poker games to marriage to patents. I mean, like when things are important, he can't do it. Now, he lost his money in gambling, but twice.
Yeah, but he was good under McClellan.
Well, it's okay. So maybe he's a good administrator,
right? So there are different kinds of people, and this is also one of the benefits of. I think one of the real benefits of a history like this, or a history like Thucydides, which concentrates a lot on the character of the people. There are some people that can do it when it's tough, and then there's some people that can't, and you don't even know if you're one of those people until you find out. Burnside might be fine in the railroad office, but when he's got 200,000 troops under him and Lee is on the other side of the bank, and so is Stonewall Jackson, and then your scrotum tightens up a bit and you don't know what to do. I'm quoting Foote in there. He calls one river scrotum tightening. We cold. Which I like. You ladies don't understand that. There are times when the male body will attempt to retract things back where they came from, and being confronted with the Army of Northern Virginia might do it to you. And Grant is a screw up also, but seems to thrive in those situations. He gets calmer and calmer when things get worse and worse, to the extent that that event at Vicksburg, where he didn't seem to even care that his troops were out on the field, and Pemberton has to propose the truce to go collect the dead. It's like he had disengaged even more. I would not like to be in charge of 200,000 federal troops. I would not. But for example, driving in a car, I don't know that I could command an army. I don't think it would work. I think too much, and then I'm slow to act in these kinds of things. However, I do know, for example, in driving, compare me with some of the other people in my family. When something adverse happens on the road, their response is, and for me, at least so far, my response is time slows down and I figure out the way out of the impending disaster. Well, you don't know if that's who you are until you start driving, and you don't know what sort of general you're going to be, I think, until you actually have the responsibility, which is the problem. That the North, it takes them a long time to find generals who are worth anything. All the good ones went south.
I think some of the warning signs about judgment, I think they're there for Burnside. That was really interesting to me. It should not be a surprise. Now, would you like to hear us read an account of a very effective soldier? On page 34, Major Pelham, who we've already spoken about. So I have not read any accounts of Burnside when he was a major. Some of these officers would recruit and assemble a regiment and come right in as a colonel, I think. They weren't starting as second lieutenants necessarily. Some of them did.
Yeah, it's weird. There was no particular standing army. If there had been a standing army at the time that the war started, it would have been over because they would have all been Southerners.
Yep.
And so what you have is, you don't have a standing army. You say, Breckinridge, go raise an army. We'll send you there. Kirby Smith, go to Louisiana. No, we don't have an army for you. You just have to make one when you get there.
Yep.
It's strange.
Well, it is
strange to modern ears.
It is strange, and there is some there's criticism, particularly of like the English military system, where you would buy a commission, and this is kind of like that. Yeah, there's a lot of criticism of the English military system, like in the Napoleonic era and prior, because they would buy these commissions. It happens much in the same way here, actually, but if you tell Kirby Smith, hey, you need to go raise an army, what you're doing is you're making sure that you have a charismatic leader whose soldiers want to be with him. When you sell a commission, what you're making sure is that your military is run by the aristocratic class in the country. which you may or may not want. But, those systems happened for a reason. It wasn't an accident that they were that way. I want to read about Pelham, who is a giant among men. Let me see. I'm going to back up just a hair to the last paragraph on page 33 to the people who are reading along in their copy of the Civil War Narrative, Volume 2. I'll read a pretty good chunk here because it's just the writing's good, the story's good, everything about it's good. First blood was drawn in a brief dramatic action stage in front of the Confederate right. Here the fog had rolled away so rapidly that the scene was exposed as if by the sudden lift of a curtain, showing a 3-division Federal corps advancing westward in long lines so neatly dressed that watchers on the ridge could count the brigades and regiments, 10 of the former, 46 of the latter, plus 11 batteries of artillery, each with its attendant colors rippling in the sunlight. From Lee's Hill, the Southern commander was surprised to see 2 horse-drawn guns, toy-sized in the distance, go twinkling out to the old stage road and go into position in the open within easy range of the left flank of the 18,000 Federals, which was thrown into some disorder and came to a milling halt as the 2 guns began to slam their shots endwise into the blue ranks, toppling men like 10 pins. They had been brought into action by Stewart's chief of artillery, 24-year-old Major John Pelham of Alabama, who in his haste to join the Southern Army had left West Point on the eve of graduation in '61. He had often done daring things similar to this today, but never before with so large an audience to applaud him. As the men of both armies watched from the surrounding heights, he fired so rapidly that one general involved in the blue confusion estimated his strength as at a full battery. 4 Union batteries gave him their undivided attention, turning their 24 guns against his 2. One, a rifled Blakely, was soon disabled and had to be sent to the rear, but Pelham kept the other barking furiously, a 12-pounder brass Napoleon, and shifted his position each time the enemy gunners got his range. The handsome young major was in his glory, wearing bound about his cap, at the request of a British Army observer, a necktie woven of red and blue, the colors of the Grenadier Guards. When Stewart sent word for him to retire, Pelham declined, though he had lost so many cannoneers by then that he himself was helping to serve the gun. "Tell the general I can hold my ground," he said. 3 times the order came, but he obeyed only when his caissons were nearly empty. Back at Hamilton's Crossing, he returned the smoke-grimed necktie souvenir to the English visitor, blushing with pleasure and embarrassment at the cheers. Lee on his hill took his glasses down, smiling as he exclaimed, "It is glory to see such courage in one so young."
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Oh, that's like Ajax defending the ships by himself. Everyone else is wounded. You read the Iliad and you don't say, "Well, I'm on the Trojan side, therefore Ajax is a bad guy." No, you're not on either side. You're watching people do great deeds. When Pelham, a spoiler, Pelham does not make it through the war. It says when he dies, 3 girls go into mourning, which I thought was funny.
How could a man?
It's not funny.
How could a man like that make it through the war?
He couldn't, but I mean, I'm sorry, I thought it was funny.
It was. He was a swordsman. I think.
Did they know, or if they did they find out that the other 2 girls were going into mourning and say and think less of him, or did they know about each other?
No, it was validation.
That he was courting all 3.
It was validation of his desirability and social status. You got to understand. Yeah, so this is a man who sees an opportunity to inflict great damage.
Fires down the line. So he's
cost.
crossing the T. This is a thing Jackson's going to do at Chancellorsville.
Yep.
It's a thing that Nelson does at Trafalgar, which is you're firing all of yours straight down the line, which means that your cannon it's not just going to hit one and then be through the line and be doing nothing in the fields. It goes down the line and keeps bouncing or rolling or whatever, and you can do very much damage if you can manage this maneuver, which he did with 2 guns. Which he did. It's like there they are.
I don't know how many men roll out with a sub battery of 2 guns. I don't know. Let's say there's 12 men. I don't know. Maybe there's 20. 20 men are rolling out into the naked open on a plain on the flank of 18,000 enemies. He does it with the flourish, with a necktie bound around his cap. He probably never even thought of it. But if he had thought, he couldn't have believed that he would make it back. But for the cause, these 20 or so men who rolled out there could have, maybe destroyed entire regiments. And he went and did it. Unbelievable. It's bold, and there's beauty in it too. Just wonderful. Just couldn't hardly be better. And then a couple pages later, this is the famous line from Lee. He says, "It is well that war is so terrible. Otherwise, we should grow too fond of it." Mm-hmm. And it's because of these possibilities that exist within it that would make somebody like Lee, potentially grow fond of it.
When you watch war movies, this is why Platoon is not a good movie.
Wait a minute. One of the reasons.
Studying the experience of war, I have never been in it. All I've ever done is watch movies and read books. It's all I ever want to do of it. But it is my impression that it is both things, that Lee is right. Mm-hmm. That it is glorious and it is terrible. I think Walker Percy says somewhere, if humans didn't love war, we wouldn't keep doing it. Mm. And so I'm sitting here and I don't want to do it, but somebody's out there saying, yeah, let's do it. This will be great. And finding enough people to say, yeah, this will be great. The excitement before, I said this before too. I remember 1991, Gulf War I, and how excited everybody was in the United States. Very, very happy and excited to go to war. I also remember my friend who was in that war and came back and was quite different. Yeah. Both of those, I think, are part of the reality of the thing. And if you neglect one, you don't show it correctly. If it's all glory, well, that's not true. And if it's all the horrors of war, well, that's not true either.
Yeah.
Both and. Some writing here. After the Federals have spent a whole bunch of lives, the Federals fell back, leaving the stretch of open ground between the swale and the 100 yards of wall thick strewn with corpses and writhing men whose cries could be heard above the diminishing clatter of musketry. Does that follow the historical method? Can we attest that this is a fact, that this is true?
I would say yes. How about that?
I don't.
No,
I don't know. Foote wasn't there.
We know how many people died. We know how many were wounded. How could the number of people died? And we know the square footage. We know how many acres the battlefield was. How could it not have been thick with the dead and the wounded? Are wounded quiet? No. I mean, I think we can conclude that this is probably true. Also, he drew heavily on letters and firsthand accounts, from people who were there. Now, one of the criticisms of this book is he doesn't give enough. Well, he doesn't hardly give any footnotes. All of his sources are listed in the bibliography, but you'll not get footnotes. He did not want to interfere with the narrative style. So I suspect that if we could get into his personal letters and his personal papers, that we would find that he could support that.
Well, you could go do the research yourself. You can, which is another, at least at the present, you can. You can go, and if you become interested in Civil War history, it's a very well documented war. You can. There exists, I can't remember what it's called, but there's some kind of chronicle of the whole thing. It takes like 5 shelves of a library. Yeah, and it's just the reports of the generals.
Yeah, it's the official.
You can go to a particular
Civil War, I think is what it's called.
Yeah, you can go to a particular day and just read. And a lot of it's boring. Today we crossed the river and moved into the hills. Just a dispatch to let somebody else know where they are. And you can get letters that were sent at home that people kept. They'll break your heart. There's a day by day through the Civil War that Harper's put out. You can read the newspapers from every day.
Oh my God, Karl. Civil War, War of the Rebellion, Official Records, complete set, 128 volumes. You can pick that up on eBay for $1,600.
I believe it is available online.
I'm sure it's out of copyright from way back.
But it's not as good as sitting and flipping through. Even if you've got 128 books worth of free shelf space.
Mark my words, I'll have that. I'd like to read a little bit here from page 39. All this stuff is just unbelievable to me. I can barely even read the damn thing. Got a little ellipses there in the second paragraph on 39, Karl. The truth is, my left is in danger of being turned. What hope is there of getting reinforcements across the river? This is Burnside. Of his 8 divisions, only 3 of them had been employed offensively, and one whole corps of 24,000 men, the largest in the army, saw no action at all, yet he was asking for reinforcements. I mean, this is just terrible generalship. At the height of Jackson's abortive demonstration, orders came from Burnside for Franklin to take the offensive, but he declined. He was in grave danger here, he repeated. Besides, there was no time. The sun was down behind the western ridge. Okay, whatever. Stonewall's kicking their pants. And there's just a little vignette there, what's going on. And I wrote in the margin here, how does one possibly judge these situations? I made the comment that this is poor generalship, and come to find out it was. But in the moment, how do you know what to do? The inborn judgment that these people have that are good at it is magical. Stonewall could look at a battlefield and immediately apprehend what was going on. He could see stresses and strains, weaknesses, advantages, just at the glance of these battlefields, and immediately act. And he almost always acted for the best. West Point tried to teach this, I'm sure. These people
Socrates.
These people are not the same.
Can virtue be taught?
Right.
Yeah.
Golly.
Burnside couldn't do it. And how do you know that he can't do it until you ask him to do it?
Right.
That's the problem. I remember back in the days when humans could still beat computers at chess. This is no longer the case. A human will never be world champion at chess anymore. It's a closed system. But it might have been Kasparov that they asked, who was beating Deep Thought, one of the last humans to beat the top computer. And what the computer does is examine all the moves. There's a finite amount of moves that can be made. And so the computer examines all of them and picks the best one, or nearly all of them, depending on how much computer you have. Well, how do you do this? Mr. Kasparov, how did you beat this computer when it's reviewing, 10,000 moves a second? Well, I don't have to review all the moves. I just review the best ones.
Right.
So those generals that are capable, Jackson, for instance, Lee, for instance, I don't think Grant's as good as Lee, but he's good. You look at it and you see Grant is persistent. That's his great virtue.
And brutal. He had the numbers on his side,
mm-hmm.
and could use that advantage.
Right. Burnside spent a whole lot of troops and didn't win anything. Grant spent a whole lot of troops and took Vicksburg.
Yes. Lincoln says somewhere in this book, in this volume 2, that he needs a general that can stand the arithmetic.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. I don't know how we have gone in quite a long time, and are on page 40.
We need to slow down here. There's too much to talk about.
Yeah, so the problem is you can't figure out who these people are. You could in a chess game because you can sit them down and have them play chess, but chess is low stakes. Much different when there are lives on the line and you're defending your country or your career or whatever. You don't know if you're going to choke in these situations till you're in the situation, and I don't know how you prepare for it.
I don't know that you can prepare for it, but it seems as though the men who are in charge will have signs once the conflict has begun as to who is who. Like Pelham is clearly a person who can recognize an opportunity and be economical with resources and apply great force. Pelham has demonstrated that he needs to make colonel like tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Burnside has done nothing but mince around for about 40 years.
Yeah.
The bullets have got to fly before you really, really, really know. But the signs are often there. Some of the signs are often there. I'm not a sports fan, Karl, but I've always been very, very interested in how do college football coaches find, recognize talent. When you read about University of Oklahoma or University of Texas or Nebraska or Notre Dame's, incoming class, how do they identify these kids that are going to make it? It's really difficult being the judge of men.
You measure them. How tall are you? How high can you jump? These are pretty good proxies for raw skill, but that doesn't measure, can you do it when somebody else is running at you to kill you? Yeah, it's football. They're not trying to kill you, but.
And do you have the work ethic to do the 2-a-days? When there are 85,000 people screaming, are you going to be okay? Can you go to the press conference and represent the school? Are you going to rape a girl at a party?
But you can make the mistake the other way. You can say, I remember there was a football player. This is back when I used to care about it. There was a football player, a very good one named Randy Moss. I think what did he play for? Marshall, the Thundering Herd. Yeah. I used to care about the Chicago Bears, and I wanted them to draft him. And the Chicago Bears at that time were being run by Mike Ditka, who liked to pick character guys because he thought character is important. And it is important. But a 36-inch vertical is more important. Mm-hmm. And you could take a guy, and Randy, I don't think blew up. He did fine. But Grant's alleged drinking, you need the guy. He's got to have it. He's got to, what is that? There's like a cowboy expression. All hat, no saddle or something.
All hat, no cattle, yeah.
Yeah, you need to have somebody who can do it. And maybe Burnside presented himself as a good company man, a man of decent character whom you could rely on, but just doesn't have it. Sometimes Lincoln has great lines. When he was told that Grant liked to drink, he said, "What brand of bourbon does he drink? I want to send it to the other generals."
But Foote's never able to establish really, to my satisfaction, whether Grant was temperate or a drunkard, or I don't know. What do you think?
Everybody from the time says that he was good, and he's got this one story. This is much later in the book, from a guy named Cadwallader, who apparently says he took care of him when he was on a bender. Mm-hmm. But he kept it quiet and didn't publish it for 60 years. So you don't know if it's true or not.
That's an account of one bender, by the way.
Right. But that's the only one. He never missed duty. He was never drunk when it counted. So if he did drink, it never mattered.
Unless you are a Puritan, fire-breathing abolitionist, in which case, you're going to hate him for it. Because this is a supreme, overarching virtue signal of the universe. This whole war is.
Yeah, so I want to get back to that thing about the writhing of the corpses and whether that's history or not. In the strict sense of the Wikipedia-approved historical method, I think it fails. This is perception. You were not there. This is quality. You can't judge the qualities of a place. I don't know that you could say so many men were there, so many died. What was it like, though?
Right.
How do you say what it's like? Well, you're going to have to be a novelist. If your goal is facts and figures, well, this is Hegel. You might as well drag the corpses through. But your goal is not facts and figures. Your goal is, well, I think Foote's goal is, because he's been doing it to me, is to put me there.
Yeah.
And drag me through it.
And the reason Foote can do that, of course, he's a very skilled writer and all that. I don't want to discount that. Is because he is there. I'm convinced that that Foote had nightmares about this. The official record of the War of the Rebellion, Karl, is made up of several parts. It was put out in in 4 different series. And then within these series, there's like one about naval actions. There's correspondence. And I think there's 4 volumes of surgical records.
Oh, gosh.
So I hear you. He's putting color on this painting for us. And he tells you in the notes at the end of the book about how he's bringing the novelist's skill to telling this story, because all history has to be told in terms of a story. We know this, and he believes that the novelist has the storytelling skills that are needed to make it understandable to people. So he's bringing his novelist skill to what he read. As far as I know, he read that entire set of the official records.
One of the cool things, Online Great Books people, about Foote in that documentary, take a look at the bookshelf behind him.
Yeah.
See what he read. He's got Dostoevsky, I remember, right behind him.
Yeah. Page 971 in the bibliographical note here in Volume 2, he says, "As for my method," this is Foote speaking of himself, "it may explain much for me to state that my favorite historian is Tacitus, who dealt mainly with high-placed scoundrels, but that the finest compliment I ever heard paid a historian was rendered by Thomas Hobbes in the foreword to his translation of the Peloponnesian War, in which he referred to Thucydides as one who, though he never digressed to read a lecture, moral or political, upon his own text, nor enter into men's hearts further than the actions themselves evidently guide him, filleth his narrations with that choice of matter, and ordereth them with that judgment, and with such perspicuity and of efficacy expresseth himself that, as Plutarch saith, he maketh his auditor a spectator. For he setteth his reader in the assemblies of the people, and in their senates, and in their debating, and in their streets, at their seditions, and in the fields, and at their battles. There indeed is something worth aiming at, however far short of attainment I fall."
Yeah. I've got that on my shelf. I've got Hobbes's translation.
Yeah. I love Leviathan.
It's depressing, though. I don't want it to be true.
I know. Tough shit. Page 56. Now, this is on the third paragraph on page 56. There is a little known or little spoken about detail here that made me put the book down and go for a walk. Speaking of Taylor in Texas, Foote writes, "Another part of his assignment, albeit one that was no more than incidental, he had also placed in the way of execution, though so far on a scale that it was small indeed. Its conception was provoked by the shortage of cotton for the textile mills of New England, 3,252,000 of whose 4,745,750 spindles had fallen idle by the middle of the year, with the result that production was down to less than 1/4 of normal before its close. New Orleans, having failed to yield more than a comparative handful of bales, the hungry manufacturers had cast their eyes on Texas. What they had in mind was conquest and colonization. They saw their chance to make of it what one observer called another and fairer Kansas, where Yankee know-how and industry, replacing the slovenly farming methods now employed, would produce more cotton in a single year than had previously been grown in all the history of the vast Lone Star expanse. That way, the idle spindles would be fed, the mill hands would return to work, and the owners would get rich. First, however, the Army would have to clear the path for immigration. And in this connection, Banks had his entourage of a Texas Unionist, Andrew Jackson Hamilton, upon whom the War Department, at the behest of the New England manufacturers, had conferred the rank of Brigadier General, together with appointment as military governor of Texas. He would take office, preparing the way for the textile-sponsored colonists, when and if Banks won control of some portion of the state for him to govern.
Yeah, how about that?
How about that?
Yeah, the cotton must flow.
Cotton must flow. Yeah. Did you guys know that? I did not know that. I'm sorry. Galveston smells bad. Did it smell bad when you were there?
Oh, it was fine. It was the closest beach we could get to.
Yeah.
And my wife likes the beach.
Yeah, women do, you know? don't understand that. There was crazy heroic stuff that happened down there in around Galveston with the cotton clads. Yeah, page 59. No, I lied. Page 58. The Federals have got naval supremacy, and they move a bunch of ships into Galveston Harbor. There are 5 Union gunboats there: Westfield, Harriet Lane, Owasco, Clifton, and Sachem, Sachem. I don't know. With a total of 28 guns. Well, General Magruder, he crossed from the mainland by the unguarded bridge. He struck the barricade shortly after midnight, only to find that his scaling ladders were too short. All he could do was work his men up close and keep exchanging shots with the defenders who had turned out at the first alarm and were laying down a heavy fire. Everything now depended on the untried 2-boat navy. He had taken some ships, some boats, not even ships maybe, 2 boats, the Bayou City and the Neptune, and just stacked cotton bales all over their decks and down the sides and down to the waterline, and essentially padded them as armor, and had attacked these 5 gunboats totaling 28 guns in Galveston Harbor. He routs them. The boldness and the ingenuity in that little naval battle there in Galveston is fantastic. In the end, Magruder lost 143 killed, but including captives, the Federals lost 600 and 2 gunboats and Galveston. So they had this, this dream of taking a bunch of surplus people from the overpopulated Northeast and sending them to Texas because Northerners are smarter than Southerners, see, and their cotton yield would be higher. Come to find out, Magruder would not have it, and they ultimately weren't able to do that until what do they call that thing after the Reconstruction?
Yeah, it's so the motives is the war about slavery. Well, yeah, but it's also about cotton production for northern textile mills.
Of course it is.
Yeah. So there isn't this is like when I read Solzhenitsyn's account of World War II, and you just end up hating everybody.
Yeah. That's where I start.
It could save time.
Yeah. I like Magruder.
Yeah, that was pretty stunning. I had not read this when I was there, or I would have done some touring, which is another thing, about a reason to study the Civil War as opposed to, say, World War II, if you're interested in war stuff. Are you going to travel to Europe and walk in the Ardennes forest and see where the Battle of the Bulge happened? Probably not. Not now. I don't want to travel anywhere, but I can get in a car and I can get to a lot of these places and stand there. I tell you, I stood, it was in June, and I drove my kids and a whole bunch of other kids on a church trip to Emmitsburg, Maryland. It was this actually happened. So we took a tour of Gettysburg, which we haven't gotten to yet. And I stood on the ridge where the Union was, looking down on the very day, at the very hour that Pickett made his charge.
I don't want to go there.
Well, I was there, and I figured it was worthwhile doing it, and it's different than reading it in a book. Standing there, being in a place where all these people died.
Does it hit different, Karl?
Yeah, well, it hit pretty hard. I think I told this story before too. I've told all my stories. So one of my daughters is in this group, and they're getting the tour. I didn't get the tour. I just walked. I didn't want the tour. I do have to say, Vermont, your state's monument there, you need to redo it. It looks horrible. You'll just have to look up a picture of it and look at it, and no, you have to fix that one. But they were having a tour. They had a tour guide giving them the tour, and it's high school kids, and you know how they are, not really paying attention. And the tour guide made the point that his teacher, when he was a young man, had shaken the hand of General Sickle, who was a Union general, who was very old at the time, and that he, the tour guide, had shook the hand of his teacher.
Mm.
And so that he had contact with, some of these people that were at Gettysburg. And my daughter waited until all the other kids left, and then she went up and shook his hand. Yeah, so she knows, at least in that moment, she knew history is not about, for me, it's not about coming to some sort of judgment about this, and picking a side and saying, you dirty Rebs, you got what was coming to you. And it's not what it's about. Victor Hugo says you don't study history to judge, you study history to understand.
Understanding ultimately will lead to judgment. Well,
yeah, Thucydides says pretty much the same thing. The reverse of the Hugo quote, it's for the future. It's not, you understand what happened so that perhaps your actions in the present and the future may be better. Mm-hmm. But you're not reading it to say, we tend to be triumphalist in our reading of the past. You want to see what team somebody's on and see whether they're the good guys or the bad guys. And Nathan Bedford Forrest is on the bad side, so therefore, don't you dare admire any of his crazy stuff that he does. Yeah, I think that's childish. I was standing there at Gettysburg, and it's strange because you look down and it doesn't look like it's a huge change in elevation when you look at it. It's not obviously a big change in elevation, but it is. And the Federals were behind this low wall, and the Confederates are running up a hill. They're gassed when they get there. And I'm not thinking, at least for me, I'm not thinking of teams. I'm there with both of them. I'm heartsick for both of them, for all the people that are led to this stupidity on this beautiful field in Pennsylvania. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but that's the way I read it. That's the way I experience it.
Yeah, that is generous. Yeah, I feel terribly for Burnside's men at Fredericksburg. Can you imagine the frustration of being mishandled and misspent in that way, like as he does? It's colossal. It's terrible.
And they kept coming.
Yep.
It's like Pelham says, I never seen anybody die so well.
You want to read a little bit about Forrest?
What, do you have a quote handy?
Oh, we can read a little bit about
65, I like.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, read it up.
The latter was amenable to no known rules of procedure, was a law unto himself for all military acts, and was constantly doing the unexpected at all times and places. Yeah, these cavalry charges, these are incredible. There are movies that could be made if, we could sensibly make a movie about these things. They would just take off and nobody would know where they were. Just break up train lines and harass the flanks and then vanish.
Yeah, Forrest was in Grant's rear for, I don't even know how long, some weeks, attacking and, their supply chain, disrupting the rear. It's classic cavalry action. And Patton is the direct descendant of this. It's just unbelievable what he was able to accomplish with so few resources. And, they said here on that page, that same page 65, that he's the only general that Grant stood in dread of. The guy was unbelievable, and they accomplished so much. They destroyed millions of dollars worth of material, captured like 10,000 rifles, 1 million badly needed cartridges, it says here on page 69. They saw all of this as Forrest's doing, and it was their pride. Now, and for all the rest of their lives, whether those lives were to end next week in combat or were to stretch on down the years to the ones they spent sunning their old bones on the galleries of the crossroads stores throughout the deep and central South, that they had belonged to what in time would be known as his old brigade. Every single one of those guys were just heroes, unbelievable people.
Yeah, let me read a little bit on page 68. let's see. So this is describing Forrest. He had in fact ceased firing in response to several white flags displayed along the Union line and was sending in his usual demand for unconditional surrender to prevent the further effusion of blood when an attack exploded directly in his rear. For the first, last, only time, no commas there. For the first, last, only time in his career, Forrest was completely surprised in battle. His reaction was immediate. Quickly resuming the fight to his front, he simultaneously charged rearward, stalling the surprise attackers with blows to the head and flanks, and withdrew sideways before his opponents recovered from the shock. It was smartly done, later giving rise to the legend that his response to a staff officer's flustered question, "What shall we do? What shall we do?" was, "Charge both ways." That's fantastic. So there you go. That's what do you do when everything falls apart on you? Well, some of us will panic. People like Nathan Bedford Forrest will go sideways and figure a way out. And that's fantastic. So Grant's kind of stuck. So they need to take Vicksburg. Vicksburg is a fort. If you've never been there, it's up on a hill. It's on a bluff of the river.
We're skipping to Vicksburg?
Well, no, we're not skipping to Vicksburg. He's talking about Grant. Well, what's Grant doing?
Okay.
Grant is attempting to figure out a way to take Vicksburg. It takes a long time. I'm not skipping to Vicksburg. But you can't get there. I mean, it's I should pull up a map. Surrounded by swamps.
Yeah, it's the Mississippi Delta that people talk about.
Yeah, which is, for me, it's a little weird. So it's not the delta, like you think the delta of the river as being that part that's out in the ocean. It isn't. It's further north, but I'm just pulling it up on Google Earth. And it's pretty green and wet on the satellite picture. Even now with the river under control. So the Mississippi runs through the Confederacy. If you can control the river, you can cut the Confederacy in half. That's the plan. Wasn't that the plan from the beginning?
Yeah, it seems like that should have been the plan from the very beginning. I said,
well, wasn't that the Anaconda plan, the naval blockade, and then go down the Mississippi?
Of course, that's harder to do than they had thought. Grant is in Memphis. They control the Mississippi from Memphis north. Banks and Butler and various different military governors hold the mouth of the Mississippi at New Orleans, and connecting those two forces is proving to be a lot more difficult than they thought, that they ever thought it would be. And that sort of tri-state Delta area there, where Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi all join by Yazoo, is just almost too much for them. But Grant, so Grant comes up with, I think, 7 separate experiments or tests, or I don't know, to try to get through and connect with run the blockade at Yazoo and move south on the Mississippi from Memphis. They're not very successful, one, but the ingenuity and the boldness involved in almost in all of those abortive efforts is pretty amazing to me.
Yeah, what you see. So this is a different test. This is not. I mean, granted, has shown his coolness in battle, but this is like administrative hell. There's that city. You have to take it. There's no way to get there. You need to get your men down there. You're probably going to come from the south. You need to get them across the river and come at Vicksburg from the south. But none of this is easy to do. You know, you might drown in a bayou. What do you do when your plans go wrong? Which they did 7 times. Well, lots of us would quit. Or lose heart, or And like there's one part where I'm looking for it, where one of the plans didn't work and Grant doesn't yell at the guy who failed.
Right.
Which is a little contrary to, well, it's contrary to the Northern practice, which was to fire every general who doesn't immediately have a victory, which shows you why Grant is ultimately successful, or at least part of the reason Grant is ultimately successful, that and the arithmetic.
Yeah, Grant is his own kind of brilliant. Foote, before he approaches the problems of Yazoo and the Trans-Mississippi, he talks about political problems that Lincoln was having in the new year there of 1863, right? The winter of 1862-63. I'm going to read a little chunk off of page 114. I'll read my marginal note here first. My note says, I don't understand any of this political bullshit. And I'll read this paragraph. Like Simon Cameron a year ago, the Treasury chief had learned the hard way what it meant to tangle with Lincoln. Cameron was in Russia now, a victim of political decapitation, and Chase was determined to avoid such punishment. He would forestall the headsman by submitting, however regretfully, his resignation. This is exactly what Lincoln wanted, as was shown next morning, December 20th, when he came into his office and found Chase, Wells, and Stanton grouped around the fire. Chase began to complain of yesterday's damage to his dignity. It had affected him most painfully, he said, for it seemed to indicate a lack of confidence. In fact, he hesitated. He had written out his resignation at home the night before. Lincoln's reaction to this was not at all what the secretary had expected. His expression was one of downright joy. "Where is it?" he said eagerly. "I brought it with me," Chase replied, taking a letter from his inside coat pocket. "Let me have it," Lincoln said, and he put out a long arm. Chase drew back, but not in time. Lincoln had already had hold of the paper, and the secretary suffered the added shock of having it snatched from his grasp. Reading it quickly through, Lincoln laughed, a triumphal laugh. Wells called it in his diary. "This cuts the Gordian knot," he explained. "I can dispose of this subject now without difficulty. I see my way clear." Stanton, who had been guilty of some of the same backstairs maneuvers, though he did not know whether the president suspected him or what he might do if he did, remarked stiffly that he was prepared to tender his resignation too, but Lincoln already had what he wanted and had been working toward. "You may go to your department," he said gaily. "I don't want yours. This," he held up Chase's letter, "this is all I want. This relieves me. The case is clear. The trouble is ended. I will detain neither of you longer." So there's all this, Wiener measuring, backstabbing, ridiculous political infighting. And then, and Lincoln is standing astride all of this, and he's about to lose the Secretary of War, Stanton, who he should have lost, by the way. I think Stanton probably had him killed. How about that hot take? When Chase and Seward are fighting, it's just insane. And he's got all these politicians in these key positions. And for some reason, he wants to continue to maintain a coalition of these people, and he's playing them off of each other. And he wants this resignation from Chase, which he ultimately doesn't accept. Chase keeps his job, I believe. I'm like, I don't understand how any of that shit works. A bunch of people around me that acted that way, I would fire all of them.
Well, you're not in politics. All of these people have constituencies.
Right. Right.
And so he has to manage this. My marginal note was masterful politician, poor commander-in-chief.
Yeah. Charity and I had a car trip to make whenever this was. And I said, "Hey, would you drive? I really need to read." And she said, "Yeah, but you have to read to me." I said, "Okay, that's fine." So I read for 2 or 3 hours, like right through this section here. And the wife is she doesn't have any real firmly held views about the Civil War. She hasn't read much about this stuff. It's not an area of her interest, And I read through all of this and stopped to take a drink of water or something. And she said, "All this is Lincoln's fault." She's like, "He's terrible. He caused all of these problems." Talking about the political problems in his cabinets. And I think she's right. I think he liked it.
It's hard to follow. I have a hard time thinking that way.
What way? That he liked it, or thinking about all of it like Lincoln thinks about it?
Thinking about how I can play people off each other. I mean, he has this cabinet meeting and he questions Chase last. So, I mean, this is bottom 113. He paused, then turned to the 6 cabinet members present, beginning to poll them one by one. Did they or did they not agree with his statement of the case? On the state of the war, they did, or so they said. Yeah, that right there, they did, or so they said. I hate that stuff. One by one until he came to Chase. Chase, as it turned out, also agreed, but not without considerable hemming and hawing by way of preamble. He would never have come to the meeting, he said, if he had known he was to be arraigned. And that after that, that's why he gives his resignation letter. And now Lincoln's got resignations from both of those rivals, he says. And Lincoln does turn a good phrase every now and then. Oh, now I can ride. I've got a pumpkin in each end of my bag. Which, you can't ride if you only have one pumpkin. You got to balance it with another pumpkin on the other side.
Yeah, Chase says, "Oh, I wouldn't have come if I had known I was to be arraigned." And what he's saying is, I wouldn't have come to this meeting if I was going to have to, say the truth. That's ultimately what he's saying there. This whole thing is disgusting. He did not deserve to win. I'm still very conflicted about Lincoln. I think he is brilliant in ways. He is brilliant in ways that I do not appreciate. Political maneuvering, for example. He does turn a brilliant phrase, but I still do not understand his motivations. My union, I still don't understand that. When we last talked about this, you said that Lincoln, let me see if I can, well, you can clean it up if I get it wrong. You said that Lincoln was elected by a fair election across the country, right? A popular election. And, that Lincoln believed that the secessionist states should have to stand by the results of that election.
Oh, I can't remember, but that seems to be.
And then you said something like, somebody will roll the tape back and find this, and I'll be wrong. But see, what happened doesn't matter. It's my recollection of it, Karl.
That's, of course.
But otherwise, what is the point of an election, right? And I thought about that. That gave me pause. That has given me pause because we have some challenges with elections these days. I don't know if you've noticed this.
I have noticed.
Can I give a brief recap of problems with elections of late? In 2000, the Supreme Court decided the presidential election. Do you remember that? A great number of people thought this was a bullshit election. And then some other things have happened, and a great number of people on the other side said, not my president, this is a bullshit election. There was hacking. And then some other things happened, and then election went the other way, and then the other half of people said, you know what? This is a bullshit election.
Mm-hmm.
So we are increasingly, both sides of, whatever, if there are only two sides, there, half of the electorate thinks that half of the elections are bad, and the other half of the electorate thinks the other half of the elections are bad. So we're headed towards this. And I thought about it, and I think the Declaration of Independence is right. Even though we vote, there still has to be government by the consent of the people. I think that if the election goes wrong, it is best in a political system for those who lost to be able to leave that arrangement. Not because of, what that would do for elections, but that would cause both, since we're in this supposedly two-party system, it would cause the candidates to be more centrist. Because if I put forth a radical candidate and then he brings off an election and you lose half of the tax base, half of the country, half of the geography, the mouth of the Mississippi, then we might, at our convention for our party that you and I are going to put together, Karl, tender more moderate candidates.
What would the name of the party be?
Oh, the Hambriconians. Whig's already been
not taken. The Carlvanians?
Well, that's our loyal opposition, the controlled opposition. don't know. But I think
well, currently it plays, and maybe it did in 1860. You play to the most important thing. Well, it used to be the most important thing was turning out your base. Now it might be the most important thing is collecting ballots, which is an entirely different thing from collecting votes. But we'll just leave that lay.
But that's the game.
So
that's the game. Go play.
Yeah, but you go fire up your edge people to make sure they all show up. And you don't have any, because Lincoln settled the question of secession, you don't have any worry that you're going to lose half the country. And so if you can get your, for example, urban voters on the coasts to come out for you 100%, screw everybody else. You don't need to consider them because you've got the country and the army, and you've already got the precedent of the Civil War.
Yeah.
Texas, you can't secede, will invade you and kill you.
Yeah.
So we don't need to put up with your politics.
When you said that on our last show, I thought, if people leave, what is the point of the voting? And then I realized, oh, no, I've got it backwards. If people can leave, that makes the voting honest. When Obama got elected, I wasn't really that sad. A lot of people would think that I would have hated that, but he ran largely on a get us out of these wars campaign. Now,
yeah, he did.
That didn't happen, but I was stupid, So when he got elected, and I didn't vote for him, but when he got elected, I thought, well, doggone it, if he doesn't do anything else but get us out of those wars, that'll be okay. So he wasn't an entirely unacceptable candidate to me, is what I'm saying. And if people can secede because of the results of a nationwide election, then the candidates are going to be, somewhat acceptable to both sides. Now, there's another problem, though, which is one of demographics and of culture. My argument about secession and voting makes good sense if there is actually a governable nation, not a country, nation, a group of people that share mores, values, telos, etc. And we probably don't have that now. So no matter what happens, no matter what the election game is, whether it's motivating the base or collecting ballots, the people of North America are probably too fractious to have any sort of an election that anyone will accept.
Yeah, I think we need monarchy, pretty much.
Well, a monarch's going to have a big problem with this fractiousness.
Yes. On the other hand, a monarch might actually view the nation as something to be cultivated rather than something to be looted.
I agree with that. I'm a monarchist. But the actual work of governing right now with this fractious population would be just damn near impossible.
Well, you'd have an empire on the Russian model.
Well,
you know what the monarchist party slogan is?
No.
Vote for us so you won't have to.
Oh, I like it. I can get behind that. When I'm monarch, I'm going to build my transatlantic catapult, and the fractious groups that I'm not interested in, they go in the catapult. And we catapult them right into Malmo. They burn up on reentry, but we don't care. They're gone now.
Looking at Lincoln, looking at it to judge him, it doesn't make any difference whether I judge him. He's already dead. But to understand what he did, to understand the consequences, to know that the nation is different. If secession is a dead letter, there are consequences for it.
Yep.
It's useful to study this sort of thing. Yeah, if you're a constitutionalist, Lincoln is going to bother you. Let's see. So this is the bottom of 109. An economist came to Lincoln with a plan for issuing greenbacks. Lincoln heard him out, liked the notion, but told him, "You must go to Chase. He's running that end of the machine." The man left, then presently returned, saying that the secretary had dismissed him with the objection that the proposal was unconstitutional. Lincoln grimaced. "Go back to Chase," he said, "and tell him not to bother himself about the Constitution. say that I have that sacred instrument here at the White House and I'm guarding it with great care. Yeah, don't worry about it. In other words, just do the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and he makes a joke because he really is clever and funny. He makes a joke. He's like, I actually have it and I'm guarding it, which isn't to say I read it and follow it, but, you know, he's just so clever and funny, but also a prick. I mean, like, even if you agree with everything he does, don't you have to grant that he was a tyrant? You know, our ancient friends would often declare a tyrant, right? They're like, oh, we need somebody to bring the hammer down. Times are tough, right?
I don't know. You might say a tyrant is in it for his own gain. A king is in it for the good of the nation. I don't know what. Well, he ended up not getting any gain out of it.
Seward saw to that, or Stanton saw to that. I mean,
yeah, I was reading a Twitter guy. He proposed, it was a very fascinating thread he started, and he pointed out the Catholic connections of Jefferson Davis.
Oh, yeah.
And how all the conspirators were Catholics, and that this was a secret Vatican plot to get rid of Jefferson Davis. And it was this wonderful thread he was spinning. And then I think it got too good, and they said, "Look, guys, I'm just kidding."
Right? Psych.
I was with them. I was like, "Tell me more. Let me subscribe to your newsletter." And yeah,
you go to his Substack.
Yeah.
Here's some interesting story in writing, some interesting story and some interesting writing on page 147. The word shoddy was comparatively new, having originated during the present century in Yorkshire, where it was used in reference to almost worthless quarry stone in nearly unburnable coal. Crossing the ocean to America, it took on other meanings, at first being used specifically to designate an inferior woolen yarn made from fibers taken from worn-out fabrics and reprocessed, then later as the name for the resultant cloth itself. Poor, sleazy stuff, one of Horace Greeley's Tribune reporters called it, woven, open enough for sieves, and then filled with shearman's dust. While Harper's Weekly used even harsher words in referring to it as a villainous compound, the refuse and sweepings of the shop, pounded, rolled, glued, and smoothed to the external form and gloss of cloth, but no more like the genuine article than the shadow is to the substance. Thoroughly indignant, the magazine went on to tell how soldiers on the first day's march or in the earliest storm found their clothes, overcoats, and blankets scattering to the wind in rags or dissolving into the primitive elements of dust under the pelting rain. Yeah, so that's where the word, where sleazy and shoddy comes from. The contractors asked that, while meanwhile raking in profits that were as long as they were quick. The only drawback was the money itself, which was in some ways no more real than the sleazy cloth or the imitation leather, being itself the shadow of what it had formerly been. With prosperity in full swing and gold rising steadily, paper money declined from day to day, sometimes taking sickening drops as it passed from hand to hand. All it seemed good for was spending, and they spent it. Yeah. Millionaire Boston.
Yeah, so the North is getting rich.
Yep.
In the war, there's a lot of people getting rich. There are economic interests. So was the war about slavery, or was the war about the North getting rich? What is that line? Old King Cotton is dead and buried, brave young corn is king. That was the refrain of a popular song written to celebrate the bumper grain crops being gathered every fall. One particularly disturbing aspect of this was, so this is Buckland, page 149. A representative of the Hatters, one McDonough Buckland, believed that the war was being used by the rich as an excuse for increased exploitation of the poor. As Buckland put it, the machinery is forging fetters to bind you in perpetual bondage. It gives you a distracted country with men crying out loud and strong for the Union. Union with them means no more or less than that they want the war prolonged, so that they may get the whole of the capital of the country into their breeches pocket and let it out at a percentage that will rivet the chain about your neck. It's the old story. Every day the rich are getting richer, the poor poorer. Well, I don't know. How true is that? Does that follow the historical method? Certainly people got rich and or perhaps have no interest in making the war go away. And then what really, really bugged me was, let's see, you have a draft, the institution of the draft, first in the North, then in the South, but you can buy your way out of the draft for $300. So this is page 151. The draft passed in early January, second paragraph, as if in solution of the problem of Fredericksburg losses hardly affected anyone not willing to be affected, or else so miserably poor in these high times as not to be able to scrape up the $300 exemption fee as often as his name or number came up at the periodic drawings. In which case it might be said that he was about as well off in the army as out of it, except for the added discomfort of being drilled and possibly shot at. Large numbers of men from the upper classes, whether recently arrived at that level or established there of old, went to the expense of hiring substitutes, usually immigrants who were brought over by companies newly formed to supply the demand, trafficking thus in flesh to an extent unknown since the stoppage of the slave trade, and who were glad of the chance to earn a nest egg, which included the money they got from the men whose substitutes they were, plus the bounty paid by that particular state to volunteers, minus, of course, the fee that went to the company agent who got them this opportunity in the first place. This is some history I would like to dig into more and figure out. You have immigrants being brought because of the demand for men and being paid to be substitutes in the draft. So if you're in the North, you don't care if the war goes on. You don't care about anything that happens to the South because it's not you getting shot at. In the previous paragraph, interrupted at 1861, for example, the Harvard-Yale boat races were resumed 3 years later in the midst of the bloodiest season of the war, and not a member of either crew volunteered for service in the Army or the Navy. Or let me read a little more. Are you getting bothered by this, dear listener? I'm getting bothered all over again. This is top of 152. In the vast new army of 300,000, which Mr. Lincoln has ordered to be raised, one editor wrote, marveling at this gap disclosed in the new prosperity, there will not be one man able to pay $300. Not one. Think of that. So the North has a manpower advantage. How do they get the manpower advantage?
Bringing Irishmen over. And that's who they were most.
Yeah, screw them.
That's
Irish.
mostly who they were. Yeah, well, and then
Better
it
off
changed
without
the
them.
whole. And it was an Aristotelian revolution too. It changed the electorate, and these Puritans that were in control of Boston lost it. Those Irish, whether you all like it or not, they brought their machine politics, and by the 1890s had taken it over. Go read about it in your state-sponsored textbook. It's all right there to see. Nobody ever connects all the dots.
Well,
but they did the Civil War.
the Kennedys.
And the you don't have bootlegger Joseph Kennedy and his criminal, Teddy, and you don't have all that stuff without their transatlantic, Irish slave trade. Good move, guys.
I want to go back to something we skipped over, the arithmetic. 118, I guess, back.
Yeah, there it is. 119.
Yeah, 119. So we're going to read this backwards. So we have read about the North importing people to fight this war so that they don't have to suffer. Makes sense. You would do it, right? Let's see. So I'll start about a fifth of the way down the page on 119. The Union had 918,211 soldiers under arms, whereas the Confederacy had 446,622, or a good deal less than half as many. At several critical points along the 1,000-mile line of division, the odds were even longer, out in Middle Tennessee, for instance, or down along the Rappahannock, and the troubled commander-in-chief found solace in brooding on these figures, even those that reached him from the field of Fredericksburg. We lost 50% more men than did the enemy, a member of the White House staff remarked after hearing his chief discuss the outcome of the fighting there. And yet there is a sense in the awful arithmetic propounded by Mr. Lincoln. He says that if the same battles were to be fought over again every day through a week of days, with the same relative results, the army under Lee would be wiped out to the last man, while the Army of the Potomac would still be a mighty host. The war would be over, the Confederacy gone. There was error here. Northern losses in the battle had exceeded Southern losses not by 50, but by considerably better than 100%. And yet, this is Foote, and yet there was validity in Lincoln's premise as to the end result. Especially was there validity in the conclusion the staff man heard him draw. No general yet found can face the arithmetic, but the end of the war will be at hand when he shall be discovered. Okay, what's he mean by that?
Read on.
Well, you go ahead.
Scott and McDowell, Pope and McClellan, and now Burnside. None of these was the killer he was seeking. Already he saw that this search was perhaps, after all, the major problem. All else, while, like Blondin, Lincoln threaded his way, burdened by untold treasures, was in a sense a biding of time until the unknown killer could be found. Somewhere he existed, and somewhere he would find him, this unidentified general who could face the grim arithmetic being scrawled in blood across these critical, tragic pages of the nation's history.
Oh, gosh.
You know, this is one of the reasons why I sometimes think that McClellan was right. If you just do the math, maybe the North really doesn't even have to do anything but just embargo.
Mm-hmm.
And
embargo and industrialize, and eventually they'll come to you.
But you know what I've been thinking about? Because we've been watching some embargoes lately. Did you know that? We don't call them embargoes now because an embargo doesn't imply a moral component. But if you sanction someone, that sounds like there's a moral component, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Sanctions or embargoes only work if free trade is categorically good.
What are you saying?
If free trade is bad and you are a nation that has sufficient resources, an embargo will improve long-term your national situation. Now, if you're an idiot, you would say, look at the embargoes on Cuba. Cuba doesn't have any resources. Doesn't work. Doesn't hold. Doesn't reach. Iraq, same thing. They don't have any water. Embargo the South. It might not work. Embargo Russia. Doesn't work. Russia embargoed themselves for 1,600 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was thinking that about McClellan, but in watching what's going on now, I've decided, no, that's not true. That's not necessarily right. You know, given enough time, the South would have developed its own economy and completely severed all economic ties with the Union, and would have proceeded. He had to prosecute the war and drive this bloody math. I am no longer a believer in free trade. So if you don't believe free trade is a good, then sanctions are a good. See how that works? What do you think of that?
Wait, I think you got it reversed.
No, if you don't believe that free trade is good, then sanctions are a good. Well, for the sanctions.
Well, sanctions are good for the country sanctioned.
For the sanctioned.
Yeah, got it. I had a dangling referent there.
How awesome would it have been in like 1969 if China had never traded with us? Oh, T-shirts would cost more.
But we'd have domestic T-shirt production.
Right, and microchip and everything else.
My wife wants something for Christmas, and she specifies not made in China. And I'm like, you might as well ask me to buy it from the moon.
Right.
You know, it's not going to happen. we have we have very, very little manufacturing anymore of anything because of free trade.
Would it be fair to
worked
say
out
that we
great.
are deindustrialized? Would it be fair to say that?
I think so.
Would that mean that we're post-industrial? Or would that mean that we're tantamount to pre-industrial now?
It means that if the stuff hits the fan, we're screwed because we can't make anything.
Yeah, it's going to be great, guys.
95% of the pharmaceuticals are sourced in China.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah, don't buy any property in Taiwan. Merrimack, we're not experts, okay? But neither are you.
You're not an expert. Like, who would he say is an expert? We can listen to Bill Crystal, Max Boot, French. Who are you going to talk to? The disgusting Yellen? Who's that?
Alexander Vindman.
Who's that monster that's caused all this in Ukraine? What's her name? Victoria Nuland?
Veronica something? Victoria.
Nuland?
Yeah, Victoria Nuland.
You're going to go listen to her? Towering intellect.
They're experts.
Expert? You fucking idiot. Come on. I can't do this stuff anymore, Karl.
I haven't sworn the whole time. I'm inspired by what are those two generals? What Polk says, go give him what General Cheatham says.
Right.
He didn't want to say go give him hell. But Merrimack is not our audience. Merrimack's not even listening. He's gone. He's not listening.
I know. My God. So here's something interesting about the inflation. We were talking about stuff that was shoddy or sleazy. They were experiencing inflation. I was looking the other day about this, and at that time, the federal government had a gold window, they call it. So you could take money, you could take paper currency, and you could go to the gold window and buy gold, or you could take gold to the gold window and sell gold at a fixed exchange rate. And it was $18 and some change. I don't remember what it was. So an ounce of gold in 1861 was a little over $18, if memory serves. But that price, that exchange rate, type in historical gold price. That exchange rate was fixed for a very, very, very long time. Well, okay, here I could just read it. 1833, it was fixed at $18.93. In 1872, they raised that to $18.94. They bumped it another penny, another penny, another penny. Lo and behold, it kind of comes unglued a little bit around 1920. And then by 1971, the gold window is closed and the price is unpegged, and off it goes. So there's basically no inflation from really actually 1789 until about 1970. 1970, the gold price was $36 an ounce. So between 1800 and 1970, 170 years, the dollar pretty much lost half its value. But that's not look, I'm a modern man. I live in current year. I'll take losing half its value in 170 years. But they were printing so much money. And I'm going to do some more research on this. They were writing about he was writing about this inflation. You can see it on page 148 as well, where they talk about the sickening drops in the value of the money as it passed hand to hand. It was only good for spending. It seems like, I'm going to have to go check this out. If there is inflation, but you have a working gold window, then the gold window is not fully open. Are you with me, Karl?
Tell me more.
If the value of the dollar is dropping steadily day by day, but the federal government says we'll redeem your dollar, $18.93 worth of money for an ounce of gold, if that dollar is falling, people are going to be crowding the gold window, exchanging it for those gold coins. If there is inflation and the money is dropping in value day by day, hand by hand, then the gold window almost necessarily is rationing the actual number of transactions they'll do at that price. Because if the money's losing value and you've got X amount that you're willing to save, you would go to the gold window and exchange those falling tickets for an ounce, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
Be there first thing in the morning.
yeah. And as people did that, that would stop the inflation. That's the purpose of having a gold window. The gold window is when people say that you have a gold-backed currency, then that facility exists somehow in the system.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
There was chicanery going on.
No way.
And our greatest president, Jackson, he fought against having a bank that would allow them to do this sort of thing.
My mind is a little boggled that inflation is just seen as that a fiat currency, nobody seems to know about it. Nobody seems to care about it.
Yeah. The inflation target rate is 2 points, which means the value of your money is going to cut in half every 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's ridiculous.
Might as well go spend it. Don't save it. It's no good.
Well, the velocity of money. When our Sino-Russian overlords are in ascendancy and have taken over everything, they're going to expose all of the lies of 20th century economics. I can't wait.
Best case. I started studying Russian on Duolingo.
Good for you.
I needed to get my brain working on something that wasn't, I don't know. I feel like I'm getting dumber. Merrimack's right. Yeah. I'm getting dumber. So I'm trying to, listen, buddy, I'm trying to get smarter.
Merrimack and I.
The reason for the delay in putting out podcasts is that Scott has thought that I'm just too dumb. You need to give me time to work up my brain cells. In the meantime, the Emancipation Proclamation has been signed.
Which he literally kept in his desk drawer for months.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
So this is page 120, 121. I did not know about this, and this is another thing I'd like to look into. There were plans for compensated emancipation.
That's what England did.
Yeah, that would have, it seems to me, would have been the thing to do. You're already inflating the currency. You might as well just inflate it some more and buy everybody slaves. Be done with it. No bloodshed. Would that cost more or less than the Civil War?
Well, how much is the
total cost in money and lives for the Civil War?
Way cheaper. Compensated emancipation is way cheaper. But here's the thing, though, Karl. You cannot compensate them. They are your enemy. They're ideologically your enemy.
You should know, dear listener, if you don't already, the Emancipation Proclamation, which is held up to be this wonderful document. So let me read from 121. All of Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Missouri were exempt by specific definition within the body of the edict, along with those portions of Virginia and Louisiana already under federal control. Lincoln himself explained that the proclamation had no constitutional or legal justification except as a military measure. The exemptions were made because the military necessity did not apply to the exempted localities. And here's Foote again. He freed no slave within his reach, and whether those beyond his reach would ever be affected by his pronouncement was dependent on the outcome of the war, which in turn depended on the southward progress of the armies. So let me repeat. The Emancipation Proclamation freed exactly 0 slaves. But there were slaves in the Union. There were slaves in the Union. Delaware was a slave state. Maryland was a slave state. Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri. Not one of those slaves was freed that he actually had the power to free. But the war is about slavery. Yes, it's about slavery. Kind of, sort of. It's about a lot of other things, too. If it was entirely about slavery, then he would have freed the slaves of Delaware. But he didn't, because then Delaware might secede.
Right.
It was about secession first, slavery second.
Sort of, unless we want West Virginia to secede from Virginia, and then that's okay.
Well, West Virginia seceding is a good secession, Scott.
Right.
Because it's from them to us.
Right. But if Maine secedes and joins the Canada like England wanted them to, that would be bad.
Right, because that's bad secession.
But
from us to them.
Canada, slavery was illegal in Canada, so that would be good, right?
No, because they'd be leaving us and going to them and taking all of the maple trees with them and the lobster pots. You clearly don't understand anything about politics.
I don't. Well, I'm stupid.
Right. This is a show by dumb people for dumb listeners, apparently.
It's a book review show.
By the dumb for the dumb.
Golly. Astounding, man. It's astounding.
So slavery was slavery needs to end. How are you going to do it? It ends elsewhere in the world peacefully. Why does it have to be bloody here?
That's a good question you ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, very little about this stands up to any sort of real scrutiny. Well, Karl, we're 160 pages in. That means we can finish this book in 5 more shows. 10 more hours, we'll finish this book. 12 hours for volume 3. That'll get us to 6 because I get so mad recording, I can't. It's not even good for me.
We could take a break or read something else and come back to it.
I don't know. Can I read about a little battle in Congress? Because this is just fun.
Sure.
I'll wrap it up. Page 161. Theatricals were in general unavailable to the public, and they were conducted behind closed doors. There was crazy stuff going on in the House. Someone had proposed that the national seal be changed to a terrapin passant, never in haste being the motto. In early February, the Alabama fire eater William Yancey, opposing the creation of a Confederate Supreme Court, which incidentally never came into being because of states' rights obstructionists. Now, this is the Confederate Congress. Infuriated Benjamin H. Hill of Georgia, a moderate, such that he threw a cut glass inkstand at the speaker and cut his cheek to the bone. As Yancey, spattered with blood and ink, started for him across the intervening desk, Hill followed up with a second shot, this time with a heavy tumbler which missed, and the sergeant at arms had to place both men in restraint and remove them from the chamber. Less fortunate was the chief clerk, shot to death on Capitol Square 2 months later by the Journal clerk, who was angry at having been accused of slipshod work by his superior. The killer was sentenced to 18 years in the penitentiary, but nothing at all was done to a woman who appeared one day on the floor of the House and proceeded to cowhide a Missouri congressman. She, too, was a government clerk, but it developed that her wrath had been aroused by information that Congress, in connection with the enforcement of the Conscription Act, was about to require all clerks to divulge their ages. Deciding that the woman was demented, the House voted its confidence in the unlucky Missourian, who apparently had been selected at random. No such vote was ever given to Jefferson Davis's old Mississippi stump opponent, Henry S. Foote, who worked hard to deserve the reputation of being the stormiest man in Congress. He fought with his fists in and out of the chamber and was always ready to fall back on dueling pistols with which he had a considerable experience. An altercation with an expatriate Irishman and Tennessee colleague had struck Foote over the head with an umbrella and then dodged nimbly to keep him from being shot, caused all three to be brought into the mayor's court and placed under a peace bond. Another three-sided argument occurred in the course of a congressional hearing in which a commissary department witness was so badgered by Foote that the two came to blows. Foote tore off his adversary's shirt bosom, and when the commissary general Lucius Northrop came to the witness's assistance, Foote knocked him into a corner, according to some who despised Colonel Northrop, asserting that he was attempting to convert the Southern armies to vegetarianism. This was Foote's one real contribution to the Confederate war effort. But he was by no means through providing excitement. In the course of his speech, a speech by E.S. Dargman of Alabama, Foote broke in to call him a damned rascal, which so infuriated the elder congressman that he went for the Mississippian with a knife. Foote avoided the lunge, and then Dargan by now had been disarmed and lay pinned to the floor by colleagues, stepped back within range and, striking an attitude not unworthy of Edwin Booth, whose work he had much admired, hissed at the prostrate Alabamian, "I defy the steel of the assassin."
Is that a relative?
I looked it up. He is not, as far as I could tell, he was not a relative of Shelby Foote. But this chapter here, or this section of this chapter here, is about life in Richmond in 1863. The Victor Hugo novel, Les Miserables, however you say it, had come out the year before, and the people of Richmond were surprised to find out it was not about themselves. Reading it, that it was Lee's Miserables. Yeah.
This is a tragic, horrible, but very funny war, if that makes any sense. And I kind of wish our Congress would do things like this. Care enough about things to draw knives on each other.
Yeah.
At least it would be entertaining.
We have the makings of it. Oh, gosh. Well, there's that. There's 160 pages of the 3,000-page Civil War narrative by Shelby Foote. I've been reading other things, Karl, which has been a delight.
Yes, what have you been reading?
Gosh, lots of stuff about farming, of course. I read The Accidental Farmers by Tim Young. I read some other damn thing. They all kind of run together. But I read A World Made by Hand by Howard Kunstler. Boy, I sure liked that.
Yeah, I think I saw that in your shop. I have been reading, I've got Aquinas to do on Wednesday.
Yeah.
So I'm digging through that. I have been enjoying Charcuterie and French Pork Cookery by Jane Gregson. She's delightful. Even if you don't cook any of her stuff, her writing's a lot of fun. So you can learn what all the bits of a pig are and what to do with them.
I read Simple French Cooking by Olney.
Yeah. I've got a butcher book that I've read. Because, if I'm going to have critters, I'm going to need to learn how to do it. So I have been reading Butchering Poultry, Rabbit, Lamb, Goat, and Pork, the Comprehensive Photographic Guide to Humane Slaughtering and Butchering by Adam Danforth. Hardback copy because, if you're going to be butchering, you don't want a paperback.
We'll laminate it.
That's interesting. I have been digging into recently a Russian novel called The Master and Margarita.
Oh, no. Our friend Katie King Johnston. That's her favorite.
Is it? I'm 62 pages in. It's pretty fun so far.
Yeah, that's her favorite.
Yeah.
She's just Katie Johnston.
Yeah.
But I had to put the...
Now that since I am a Russophile, I thought I would read some Russian stuff.
Yes.
The devil has shown up, and he's a professor. Seems right.
Of course. Faust, right? We will continue to record irregularly. I always like talking to you, Karl. I always enjoy that a lot. And if it wasn't for that, I just couldn't.
Right back at you.
Thanks, man. Because I can go out here and do my thing every day, and just not think about these things, and that's good.
Yeah. Well, I enjoy it as well. I like to do it. Maybe we can do it a little more often.
Yeah,
but this Civil War is tearing me up because he's put me right back there, and it's bothering me.
Yeah. Foote is so even-handed that Current Year thinks he's a lost cause apologist. It's ridiculous. Yeah. How long before Ken Burns has to atone for his inclusion of Foote in the Civil War documentary?
Well, the future versions of the documentary will excise Shelby Foote. It'll fit on one DVD.
Right. The unedited video of Foote that Burns shot is on YouTube, so you can go chase that down. But of course, Burns did go. He's got a new one out. Did you know he has a new documentary out, Karl?
What's it about?
It's titled "The U.S. and the Holocaust." A film by Ken Burns, Lynn Novick, and Sarah Botstein.
I think I might go read some more Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah. All right. Hey, there's that show. Thank you guys so very much for listening. Thanks to all of you, except for Merrimack Conehead, whatever his name was. You can go join us at onlinegreatbooks.com, read some of these things, this Tacitus, the Plutarch, Thucydides, Herodotus, some of these things that, and the Iliad, in the bibliographical notes at the end of the first book, Foote says that he was inspired by the Iliad, and he was trying to write the Iliad. And this is a story worthy of that. I don't know if if Foote pulls it off, but he's trying to. So Foote is drawing on all of these things that we make a study of. So go to onlinegreatbooks.com/podcast and join us and start working your way through those books. And then when you read Foote, you'll have the funded knowledge necessary to, I think, give him an honest reading. If you haven't read those things and you come to Foote, it's not going to be the same experience. If you can't compare and contrast the syntopical reading alongside your recollection of Thucydides and Herodotus and all that. Anyway, there's that. Thank you, Karl.
Thank you, Scott.
All right, and thank you.
Pleasure.
We'll talk to y'all not soon, but when we get around to it.